And I said, Diane, look what your husband just did. And she said, I did. I see it. I said, do you see what I did? And she said, you caught a bass. I said, no. I caught that bass 23 feet deep. I've never done that in my life. I never dreamed bass would go that deep. And
Wow.
thoughts just started. I'm going to be fishing a BASS tournament at Beaver Lake. This was late March. In June, I have got to change my whole direction in life.
You're dialed in to Byron Velvick's Fish Tales. Real talk, real tactics, and the stories that make it all worthwhile. Byron Velvick's Fish Tales is brought to you by Livingston Lures, Trika Fishing, Mercury Outboards, and Camus Boats. Without further ado, here's Byron.
It's Byron Velvick with Fish Tales, and man, I have an incredibly special guest today. I'm honored. I'm thrilled. I'm beyond excited to have somebody that I call a friend for 30 years. I mean, this guy has been so supportive of my career, and he made me feel good about just trying to make a living professional bass fishing. This guy's really a dear friend in a big way because, you know, you meet a guy that's a legend, you meet somebody and you're shaking when you meet him and you ask for his autograph and, you know, you want him to sign your hat and, you know, he finds out you're fishing the tour and he becomes very supportive of anybody that tries to make a living in a very hard sport, which is professional fishing. And I got to tell you, I know you guys know who I'm talking about, but Bill Dance has had a remarkable life in fishing, if you will. And recently he just had a bridge named after him. So that's the greatest new thing. I got a whole history of things that he's done, the accolades, and I'm gonna have my glasses on to read all my introduction notes, but I want to bring him on real quick just to get the show started. So here he is, without further ado, the legend, most recognized fisherman in the country, the world, the top guy in our sport and
Woo!
just in fishing in general. How do you like that, Bill? Is that a good introduction? You're the man. Here he is, Bill Dance. I can't believe you're on the show. Bill, I got to tell you, I did a reality show. 10 million people watched me give out roses. I was not as nervous giving out roses on The Bachelor as I was getting ready for this show today with you. That's how excited I was to have you on the show. I can't believe I get to spend a day on a podcast of Fish Tales with you, Bill. So thanks for coming on, man. It means the world to me.
Well, it's an honor to be with you again, buddy. Our paths don't cross very often, but I think the last time we were together, we were doing a commercial for Garmin.
That's right. We did that. We
Remember?
did the Sons of Fishes. You and
Yeah,
I did the Sons of Fishes commercial for
yeah.
Garmin. That was the last time that we were actually working together. And then I see you, of course, I see you at the shows. I saw you at ICAST, Bassmaster Classic, but you have that crowd around you. You have that pod of people that follow you to the bathroom and out of the bathroom. And when Bill Dance wants a hot dog, he's got 100 people following him at ICAST or the Classic to get a hot dog. So I watch you walk around with your Armada behind you, and boy, you can't stop to pick up a piece of gum off the floor without getting mauled by people.
Well,
It's
I thank
great.
the good Lord. I came along at the right time and got into a field that something I dreamed of doing when I was little, and I can tell you that story later how it really changed my direction in life. But I've been
Well,
very,
let's
very
let's
fortunate.
start with now. Like right now, you just got, like I said, you just turned 80. Happy birthday, belated birthday, 85th birthday. My gosh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
still.
And had a bridge named after you. Luke Bryant wrote a song about you. You've been the Tennessee Man of the Year, and you got a doctorate in fish ecology from the University of Tennessee. I read your bio, and I'm like, my gosh, you've been doing Bill Dance Outdoors since 1968. I mean, this is incredible. What a life, Bill. What a career. What a life in fishing. You must feel just blessed.
Well, I am blessed from the standpoint that I was fortunate to associate myself around a lot of people a whole lot smarter than me, and those were stepping stones in the early days of my life. You know, I remember the first bass I ever caught, and it's kind of a long story. Way back yonder, you couldn't buy. We didn't have Bass Pros. We didn't have academies. We didn't have Big Eights or Big Ten stores where we could buy fishing tackle. You bought your fishing tackle at hardware stores. And I remember in Lynchburg, Tennessee, where I grew up, in Jack Daniels country, the creek was a stone throw, Mulberry Creek, from my grandmother's front porch. And I used to go around on the square, and I'd go in the hardware store. And the old guy that ran it, he said, "I know what you're in here for. You want to see this plug, this bait again?" I said, "I sure do." Well, everything he had in the case was Arbogast baits. He didn't have anything else, nothing like bomber or spinner baits and so he got it out, and I looked at this lure, and it really caught my eye. And it was 75 cents. That bait was made, I'll tell you the name of it in a minute. That bait was made in 1934, and it was
Wow.
made out of wood. Today, it's still being made, but it's made out of plastic. But anyway, I'd look at it, and in a small town, my granddaddy was a doctor, and my daddy was a doctor, and for 5 generations back, were all doctors. And so my grandmother said, I was down on the creek, and I heard her beating on she'd go out on the front porch and take a wooden spoon and beat on a pan, and I needed to haul it and get to the house. So I got there, and she said, your granddaddy's going to a big lake today. And I said, "Really? He's not going to creek fish?" She says, "No, he's going to a big lake." And she reached in her apron, got a handkerchief. And that's the way they used to carry their change. And she opened that handkerchief, and she said, "Open your hand." She went, doop, doop, 3 silver quarters. And she said, "You better go get that bug bait that you love." And I was out the door, down and rounded the corner, right in the square, and ran right in the hardware store. And I said, "Tosh, you still got that bait?" He said, "I wasn't going to sell it because I knew someday you'd buy it." And he gave it to me, and back to the house I went. And I had a little metal rod made by True Temper, and it was metal, a little steel rod is what it was.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it had a little Shakespeare reel on it. I think I had a 19 model. It was a 1941 Shakespeare reel, and I had braided line on it, and then a section of catgut. Now, we call catgut today monofilament, but anyway, I had it all rigged up, and I tied that particular bait on, and we had lunch. In the country, they call it dinner, and at night they call it supper. But anyway, we had dinner and loaded up and drove about 7 miles outside of Lynchburg up toward Tullahoma, Tennessee, and there was a lake there called Cumberland Springs. The water was crystal clear. My granddaddy parked the car. Grandmother threw out a quilt. She said that she put 4 double colas in a spring that was coming right into the lake right beside her. And Granddaddy liked to fish for panfish, red ears, shell crackers, and he threw out. So I said, "I'm going down to that point." So I went through some brush, and as soon as I got through that brush, I looked out to my right, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. There was 2 bass swimming along, one about 2.5 pounds and one about a pound. And my granddaddy had taught me a lot about the anatomy, how fish see and how fish hear. He didn't teach me a lot about tricks. He did in the creek, wading the creek and what to do, and current lines and seam lines in the creek and eddy waters and stuff. But I saw that. There was 2 fish. And I started shaking. You could have cracked a walnut between my kneecaps. And I went, quick, 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 false cast. And I went, reel went, I made a good cast. The bait landed about 20 feet in front of the fish, And I'm kind of glad it did, because uh, if it didn't, I might have spooked them. But what happened when the bait hit the water? They stopped. And I said, they heard that bait.
Mhm.
Granddaddy was right. These fish here. And so I started, it was a surface bait. And I'll tell you the name of it. It was a jitterbug, a
Uh-oh.
frog-colored jitterbug. They still make it today. And Johnny Morris, Bass Pro, got to laughing at me about it. He said, we still sell it. We sell it for 75 cents, but we put a 6 in front of that 75, so it's 6.75. But anyway, I turned the handle and I started reeling it. Both of those fish turned in the direction of that sound. I don't know if the sound waves and I started moving it. I'd stop it, they'd stop. I'd start it, they'd start. Stop, start, stop, start. Every time I stopped it, they'd start. When I started reeling, you know how to wake that aluminum lip on it was
Oh,
shaped and
yeah?
just walk forward. And I got it probably, I don't know, 10 yards, 15 yards out in front of me. And I stopped it. Well, I watched that 2.5 pound bass. It swam around the bait and came right in front of the bait. And he did that for a head-on shot. Bass have the tendency to hit the front end of a moving object. If they hit it from the tail like bluegill, they
Yeah.
they choke on the dorsal fins, the spiny dorsal fin. But if you hit him head first, the fins fold back toward the tail. So he lined up I knew he was going to bite it when he got in front of it. He was in front of it about 2 feet, and that other one had come up under it, and I went, blah, 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 and bam, he, he blew it up. And the emotions, what was going through me, here I tricked a bass into biting a phony, an
Yeah.
artificial, just phony. And I reeled him about halfway in. I couldn't take it any longer. But I noticed the smaller fish was trying to eat it too. He came up under the bigger fish. He jumped a couple of times. But anyway, I grabbed the line and I just well roped him up on the bank. Took the hook out and went running back through that brush, screaming. Grabbed my said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I said, "Look what I just caught." And Grady said, "Let me see that." Well, we didn't have phones then. Or we didn't have, ways to take a picture. So
Right.
on the lake, we didn't think to even take one. But Granddaddy said, "Let me have him." And he caught a couple of red ears and he put him on a chain string. I said, "No, no, no. Let me just put him in the car." And Granddaddy said, "He'll be fine. I'll just double hook him if that'll make you feel better." He put him in the water and I zipped back down and I sat there and I started thinking the emotions of what I wanted to do. Right then I was 7 years old. And I had caught smallmouth in the creek. Nothing pound, 3/4 of a pound, pound and a quarter, but nothing like this bass. And I said, it was changing my direction in life. I said, I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be in the fishing industry some way, somehow, someday. And as luck would have it, uh, as I grew a little bit older, I went to work for a distributor who sold sporting goods. It was a hardware distributor. And you'd call on the dealers and buy from the distributor. And they had he had fishing tackle in that catalog. Anyway, they would have a show once a year, and these tackle manufacturers would come to the show. And I got to meet them and talk to them and everything. But in the long run, just to shortcut this, uh, that dream became a reality. Uh, it took me into the tournaments. It took me into radio. took me in the newspaper, had an article every Sunday in the newspaper in Memphis, uh, took me into manufacturing, took me into testing lures for sponsors,
Wow.
and the tournaments started to come on. And Ray Scott BASS tournaments. Diane and I were on Pickwick Lake in Tennessee. You probably fished that lake.
I
And
did.
we were just, I was sculling. I didn't even have a trolling motor. I was just sculling up the bank in a 14-foot flat bottom boat. And a boat roared up. And the front of that boat was a guy by the name of Ed House, who worked for the Game and Fish. He also had in the boat with him the best bass fisherman I ever met in my life. His name was Glenn Andrews. He lived at
Oh,
Lead Hill, Missouri. And I talked
yeah.
to Glenn last week. He's 91 years old, or going on 92. But he was in the middle, and trying to think someone else was in the boat. He said, how y'all doing? And I said, oh, Ray Scott was the other one in the boat.
Oh, just so happens it was Ray Scott and
Yeah.
Glenn Andrews. I've heard he was a legend. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. They pulled up. And this is where my life went from the jitterbug to a much higher level. He said, Bill, there's a creek channel point right up there in front of you. I said, a what? He said, a creek channel point. I said, what's that? And he says, where the creek turns in and turns out. And he's feel how heavy a sinker you fishing a slip sinker worm, which he invented years and years ago.
Glenn
I
did?
said, yeah. He said,
Glenn
how
invented
heavy is
that?
it? And anyway, he said, if you'll put you a 3/8 ounce sinker on, I said, 3/8, I don't even have one. So I looked and I said, yeah, I had 3. And I put it on. He said, throw toward the lock of the intake on the lock of the TVA dam at Pickwick and let it go down to about 24 feet. I said, what'd you say? He said, 24 feet. I went, 24 feet deep? He said, 24 feet deep. He said, we caught several this morning. I had a 6 and a couple of 4s, and they were around 22 feet. I said, you caught a bass 22 feet deep? He said, yeah. See, I grew up fishing oxbows,
Right?
and
Yes.
got a water fishing. And if I got a bait over 6 feet deep, I was really in deep water.
Mhm.
But I turned and made that cast 19, 20, and 21, and 22, and 23. Boop, the worm hit the bottom. They left, and we were going to beat them an hour and a half later for breakfast. I moved the worm a couple of times, and something went boop, and I went, pulled out. I said, good Lord, that's a bite. I set the hook, started reeling him. He jumped, about a 2.5 pound bass. And I got him in the boat, and I said, Diane, look what your husband just did. And she said, I did. I see it. I said, do you see what I did? And she said, you caught a bass. I said, no. I caught that bass 23 feet deep. I've never done that in my life. I never dreamed bass would go that deep. And
Wow.
thoughts just started. I'm going to be fishing a BASS tournament at Beaver Lake. This was late March. In June, I have got to change my whole direction in life, the way I fished. And I called Lynn 3 and 4 nights a week. What's a topo map? What's a line compass? I'd go out. I did have a graph. I bought one, but I didn't know how to read it. I could just read the depth on it. And I'd take a line compass and find fast interval drops or a bar with a channel drop on one side of it. And I'd take that line compass and look 290 degrees, and I'd mark it, and I'd name it. And I was there just constantly on Pickwick Lake learning how to fish deep water. And I got what I thought I got pretty good at it. And that first tournament came, and I called Glenn and I said, "What would you do?" He said, "I'll tell you what you do. You don't worry about catching fish your first day of practice. You go out and look. Look for it, something irregular, something different. Just because something starts at water edge doesn't mean it stops. It continues all underwater." Well, that day I went out and I idled straight across from the marina up in a pocket, and it was a gap between the tree lines. It was a timbered cove pocket. And I said, "Wonder what that is." And I said, "I bet that's a logging road." And I turned and looked the other way, and you could see where it came out. Well, I had dummy rigged my worm where they could hit it and just pull it off. But I had one rigged that way, but I had this one, it was live. I threw it up there and it went down to 17 feet. Bam, I caught one. Threw right back, bam, I caught another one. 17 foot. So I picked up the dummy and I threw it. Thump, he hit it, and I just let him pull the worm off. Got that spot. And I said, "There's a bunch of fish right here." And I ran up and got on a bluff, and out and down the edge of a bluff, I found a ledge about 19 feet. Came out of 40 up on 17 off, and I found them there. Well, I found 7 spots that were holding fish that day. And the first day of the tournament, I had a boy, Troy Anderson from Little Rock, was my partner. He said, Why are we way out here on the left end?" I said, "Because we're going right over there in that cove." And he said, "Boy, that's pretty close to the marina." And I said, "Yep." Well, Scott shot the gun, the bloom, everybody took off. Well, I turned, ran. I had a Skeeter Hawk with a 60 Burke on it. And the other big boat was Ray Mursky from Dallas. He had a Skeeter with a 50 Merc on it. But I shot right over that pocket that was idling and cut the key off, grabbed the rod, run up there by the trolling motor. And I just threw up that logging road.
Right.
And got the trolling motor to move to work. Boop, there he is. And I catch one, got him up to the boat, just whipped him over in the boat. Troy said, "Look at all the boats. They're not even out of sight. They're not even under the bridge. Bill, that's probably the first bass that's ever been caught in a BASS tournament."
I
I
heard
said,
about this. You
"Well,
mentioned
good."
it. That's a story that's in my notes. You caught the first bass ever caught in a bass tournament, and I had it in my notes as one of the things I wanted to ask you about. And that's how you did it, was on that
Well,
logging road, huh?
it was on that logging road. And so back then, the limit in Arkansas was 10. And I got 10. And Troy, I didn't want to beat the thing down. And I said, "Troy, I've got some other spots. Let's just don't beat everything down right here." So I ran up to the bluff, and I said, "Throw right down there." And he threw it. He caught him 3 more, so he had 10. I said, "I know a spot where the fish are a little bit bigger. We'll have to work at it to catch them." And I caught a 4 and a 3. And he'd stayed right there with the 1.5 to 2 pound bass that we caught off the logging road and off the bluff. But anyway, I was in first place that first day. Second day, I still had 3 spots I hadn't even fished. And second day, I was in first place. And then a good buddy of mine, Stan Sloan, made the Zorro lures.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember the Zorro lures.
Yep.
He won the tournament. But that all of this was coming together for the dream of something I wanted to do one day.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this week's episode of Fish Tales. I really appreciate you joining us. Something real exciting I gotta tell you, Mercury Outboards is giving away a brand new motor, just like this one, except bigger, up to 300 horsepower. All you have to do between October 1st, December 31st of this year is just go online and you're gonna see an automatic drawing for an outboard. You don't have to do anything besides sign up. So sign up for a chance to win a brand new Mercury outboard. They're calling it a repower program. If you don't win, it's still a good opportunity to repower your boat with a brand new Mercury like that, baby. Check out Fish Tales. I'm glad you're watching. Hope you like us. Please subscribe to Fish Tales. Now back to the show.
And So the next tournament was on Kentucky Lake, and I had second in it. The next tournament was on Smith Lake in Alabama, real deep lake, and I finished second in it. I said, Scott said, "You're always a bridesmaid." And I said, "Well, I'm going to try and."
So you had 3 seconds. You had 3 seconds in a row. The first three tournaments that they ever had that Ray Scott held, you finished second in all three of the first three tournaments.
Yeah, I finished second. And then the next year, we started out at Rayburn Reservoir in Texas. And I won it. That was 15, a limit of 15 in Texas, and a limit of 15 in Mississippi. Well, I caught a limit in Texas and won that tournament, 3-day event. I don't remember what the total pounds I had, but I was catching them deep. And Ross Barnett,
Yeah.
I did a lot what Glenn said, looking at things and trying to figure things out. And I found 4 or 5 real good places, and I won it. And then we went back to Smith Lake, and I did something I'd never done before. It's an extremely deep highland lake. I was going in this creek, and I looked out in the middle of the lake, and I saw fish schooling. And I stopped, and I watched it a few minutes, and they quit. Well, I eased out there to them, and I looked down the graph, which I couldn't really read, but I saw all this stuff mixed up. And I said, "That's got to be fish." So I put on a Dixie Jet half-ounce spoon, and I
Oh,
dropped it down. Yeah, and I raised it, and I hung up. I said, "I bet that's a treetop." Well, the tree was growing in over 100 feet of water. And so I shook it loose and eased back up, went boink, dropped it. And I said, "I'm going to keep hanging this thing up." So I hooked the spoon on the front of the boat, and I walked to the back of the boat. And I tied the line around a cleat. I said, "That's 21 feet." And I went back and I said, "That's 42 feet." And I came back to 48 feet. And we didn't have Sharpies and we had Barks-a-lots. So I took and blackened my line at 48 feet and let it dry. And I reeled it back around. Then I knew when that black line went through my rod tip
yeah.
and I put that tip on the water, it was 48 feet deep. See,
Okay.
I measured it with the length of the boat.
Right.
And
Right.
so I'd let it go to 48 and I'd jig it, and the fish, they feed up. And the fish would come up a couple of feet and grab it. And that spoon, I had 3 of them. They lasted me all 3 days of the tournament, and I won that tournament.
And
But
you won that tournament
it,
out in the middle of the lake spooning deep trees. Like you just stumbled on to a deep tree pattern, and those fish were all suspended in the trees, and you were able to measure it with the cleats of your boat and know exactly how far to drop down to get those fish to come out of the trees and eat your spoon. That all happened
if I
organically.
let it go over 50, I'd hang up. And
Oh my gosh.
but I limited. But these were spotted bass. They were Kentucky's. Really, spotted bass. And the northern strain up in Tennessee, we catch them. We call them Kentucky bass. But I got my limit the first day of the tournament, second day of the tournament, third day of the tournament. I found 3 more trees in that area, and another one held fish, and the other 2 didn't. But they were all right at 50 feet, the tops of the trees.
Right.
And so that year, I had 3 wins: Ross Barnett, Smith Lake, and Rayburn. And I came home, and within about a week, I got a call from Jim Bagley at Bagley Bait Company. It made the
Uh-huh.
Balsa Baits.
The balsa V,
And
yeah, yeah.
I got a call from Al Kennedy at Hedden, and about a few weeks later, I got a call from Nick Crean a cream lure cup
Cream
in Tyler,
worms. Oh
Texas.
my gosh. Cream
I had
worms.
job, had a job offer, and I, knowing that most of the fish I was catching back then was on a plastic worm, Nick invited Diane and I to come to Tyler. We flew down to Shreveport. He picked us up, and we stayed with him Friday night, Saturday night, and flew home Sunday afternoon. And Cosmo and Diane, Cosmo Cream, Nick's wife, Nick invented the plastic worm in Akron, Ohio, before he moved to Tyler. And he said, Bill, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever your salary is, I'll double it. I'll
Wow.
furnish you a company truck or vehicle. And what I want you to do is entertain uh, people, the mom and pops, the hardware stores, and a few of the discounts. Ansel Oshman had a big chain of stores in Houston. I want you to take their people fishing and show them how to fish the plastic worm. So I started doing that, and then I started doing riders. I'd meet riders like at Rayburn or Toledo Bend. If they were from up Kansas City, I'd meet them up on a Highland Lake, bull shows, Norfolk, up in there. But I'd stay there for a week or so and fish with these people and show them the plastic worm and fish the plastic worm. I stayed with Nick, I don't know, for about 2.5 years and just fishing. That's all I did.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Fish Tales. Appreciate you checking us out. Also, check out the Livingston Lure app if you get a chance. All kinds of great information on there. And be sure to subscribe and to like Fish Tales. Back to the show. I heard you won 7 of the first 14 tournaments you fished. Like when you started, I think your record shows you won the first 14 events. You won 7 of them, didn't you?
I was in the top 10. I was real lucky, and I was winning. I was real lucky at it, I should say. And but all my fishing was deep water.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this funny story, and then I know you probably got some other questions. I didn't mean to rattle so long.
Oh
But
no, the stories are what I want to hear. I mean, I'm imagining your stories and
pulled into Fin and Feather Marina. We had a tournament on Toledo Bend, and I pulled in to Fin and Feather to get some gas in the boat. I was running Ranger at the time, and I looked and I saw Forrest's boat parked there too. So I walked in, and Forrest was sitting over the table eating a cheeseburger and a Coke. And I ordered one, and I walked over and I said, "You need some company?" He says, "Yes, sir. Sit down." He said, "You doing any good?" And I said, "I've had a good morning." And I said, "How about you?" And he said, "I just hadn't done much good." And I said, "Where have you been fishing?" "In the back of these creeks in 3 to 4 feet of water." And I said, "Forrest, every fish I'm catching is 15 to 20 feet deep." "Are you serious?" And I said, "I'm serious." And he said, "Well, I better change what I'm doing." And I said, "Yeah." I said, he said, "Don't tell anybody." I thought, and I said, "Let me ask you a question." I was running Ranger at the time. I said, "Is it possible to get a two-tone boat?"
Mhm.
He had that cheeseburger about half in his mouth, and he opened his mouth and pulled it back out, and he said, "A what?" I said, "A two-tone boat." He said, "Bill, I don't believe I've ever heard of a two-tone boat. What is a two-tone boat?" And I said, "Well, you know my TR10 is sitting out there? You got a TR10 too? It's a solid color. Mine's solid white, and you've got a beige one." I said, "I'd like to make the rail blue, the console blue, and maybe a pretty blue figure back toward the transom on the boat, back toward the third of the way up." He said, "Will you do me a big favor?" And I said, "Sure I will." He was furnishing me boats. I said, "Sure I will." He said, "Don't tell a soul what you just told me. Please keep that to yourself." I said, "Okay." And he said, when I get back to flipping, I'll get with Randy. Randy Hopper was president Ranger and
Yeah.
Forrest's son-in-law. So I didn't hear anything out of Forrest. And about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from, I know his crazy name, Dippy Coles. And Dippy uh, was a Ranger dealer in Memphis. He said, Bill, I just got a shipment of Ranger boats, and I got one that's the prettiest boat I've ever seen in my life. I said, I'll be over there in 2 minutes. Well, I ran out and jumped in my truck and took off over to Dippy's, and I pulled up in the parking lot, and I looked, and I spotted that boat right off, and I went, golly, that's the prettiest boat I've ever seen. It was blue. It was white and blue. It wasn't overpowered with blue, but just the way it was, the way they made it, it was just gorgeous. And I said, Paul, I tell you what, I can't wait to get that thing on the water. I said, can I use your phone? And he said, yeah. I said, I'm going to make a credit card call. You could do that back then. And I called
Uh-huh.
Forrest. Forrest, hello? I said, Forrest, that's the prettiest boat I've ever seen in my life. He said, me too, Bill. Hubert Green's here right now from North Carolina. He bought 6 red and white, 10 blue and white, and 6 green and white, all
Wow.
two-tone. And
Wow.
that kick-started the two-tone with,
You you kickstarted the two-tone. You're the innovator of a two-tone boat. You started that.
well, Forrest said, we've never made a two-tone boat, but it went over big, exceptionally big. And uh, I was at a boat show in for Mercury in Knoxville, Tennessee, and Forrest was there. Guy says, he walked up and he went, you ever seen this picture before? And I said, no, but I can tell you a little bit about it. He said, tell me. I said, the picture was shot in Barber Creek on Lake Eufaula. It was a running shot.
Mhm.
And I said, it was a two-tone Ranger boat, the first one Forrest ever built. And it's probably 150 yards from where I caught my first 10 bass over 5 pounds. And
Wow.
on a ledge. And he said, yep. He said, yep. I don't know about the ledge, but I do know you were in Barber Creek. It was a Ranger boat. I said, you see that guy standing over yonder in that cowboy hat? And he said, yeah, I see him. I said, walk over there and just show him that picture. And I'll bet you he'll take that cowboy hat off and look over to me and raise it a couple of times. And I was sitting there watching. He looked at it. He handed it back to the guy and he turned. He went, raise that cowboy hat 2 times. But
Yeah, that was Forrest Wood in the cowboy hat, right?
yeah, he tipped his hat. These were just early day things that started to transpire, and fishing with writers and writers writing about you, which helped my career tremendously. And then I called DuPont Stren, a guy in marketing at DuPont in Maryland. And I said, I need to talk to Jack McCarran. They said, well, just 1 minute. And Jack McCarran said, hello. And I said, Mr. McCarran, my name is Bill Dance. I live in Memphis, Tennessee, and I fish string line. The fluorescent lines, I fish string all the time. And I'm fortunate that I know several reps, like with Gladding, uh, with not Pure Fishing, with Berkeley, that would give me line. But I want to be a field tester for string. And he said, well, what's a field tester? And I told him. He said, well, Bill, we don't have one right now, but if you want to be one, you're one. So I picked up a national sponsor. Strand was my first sponsor.
Wow. I got to leave it right there with Bill Dance because this is a key moment. Bill Dance just got his first sponsor with Jack McCarran from Stren, a very young Bill Dance who's just crushing it on the very early Bassmaster tournament trail and all the other trails, goes out and starts reaching out to guys like Jack McCarran from Stren for a field pro staff sponsorship thing. Can you imagine this? Back in the late 60s and this happening with Bill, but great stories. Pinch me, man. I'm so lucky. I was a kid idolizing Bill Dance, Hank Parker, Jimmy Houston. These guys are legends. And now I'm getting a chance on Fish Tales to talk to Bill, and it's a two-part show. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Pamela Dance, his daughter, for getting me all the pictures you're seeing through the show. And we're going to have a lot more next week. So you got to check out part 2, where he starts talking more about how, with Jack McCarran, things really got rolling for what was Outdoors with Bill Dance, which also got a title change to Bill Dance Outdoors. He's going to explain why that is in next week's episode. Please, if you enjoyed the show, please like us, make some comments, and I'll respond to the comments. I'm reading all the comments. I'm interacting where I can, and subscribe. Most importantly, subscribe to Fish Tales if you don't mind on the Livingston Lure app. Right now, every single week, we're looking at the new subscribers each week, and we're giving away a $100 pro pack of fishing lures, of Livingston lures. So every week, we look at all the new subscribers, pick out one lucky subscriber, and give them a $100 pro pack of all these great Livingston lure baits. And next week, we're coming back. Bill Dance. Part 2 is coming up next Monday. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Enjoy the holidays with your family. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next Monday.
Fish Tales has been brought to you by Livingston Lures. Learn more at livingstonlures.com. Fish Tales is also supported by these fine sponsors: Trica Fishing, Mercury Outboards, and Camus Boats.